I almost laughed when my wife stood on our front porch 6 months after leaving me and asked if she could come inside. Not because it was funny, because she had spent 3 years telling me that this house was the reason she was embarrassed to be married to me. Now she was standing outside it in the rain, holding a suitcase. And the strangest part was that I already knew why she had come back. 3 years earlier, when we bought the house, she called it a starter home. That was her polite way of saying she hated it. It was a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. The kitchen was old. The bathroom had those little square tiles people stopped using decades ago. The basement was unfinished, and the backyard wasn't much more than a patch of grass surrounded by a wooden fence. But it was ours. Or at least, I thought it was. I had saved for the down payment for 4 years before we got married. My wife, Claire, had contributed some money, but most of the savings came from my overtime work and a side business repairing computers for local companies. When I showed her the listing, she stared at the pictures for a long time. Then she said, "It's cute." I knew what that meant. "You don't like it." She smiled. "I just pictured us somewhere nicer." "Like where?" "Somewhere people don't ask if we're renovating." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Claire had always cared about appearances. Not in a ridiculous way. She wasn't obsessed with designer clothes or luxury cars. She simply believed your surroundings told people how successful you were. Her older brother, Jason, was her favorite person in the world for exactly that reason. Jason had a large house, 2 new cars, a pool, and a job that came with an impressive title. Whenever Claire talked about him, she said things like, "Jason really figured life out." Whenever she talked about me, she said, "He's good with money." I used to think that was a compliment. Eventually, I realized it was the nicest way she could describe someone she didn't think was ambitious. After we moved into the house, Claire began making little comments. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "We could actually afford something nicer." "We could," I'd say, "but we'd have a bigger mortgage." She'd shrug. "You're always thinking about the worst-case scenario." I wasn't. I was thinking about our future. I wanted to have savings. I wanted to pay the mortgage down early. I wanted to know that if one of us lost a job, we wouldn't immediately panic. Claire wanted upgrades. New furniture. A nicer kitchen. Weekend trips. Restaurants where the plates were too small for the food. I didn't mind spending money occasionally, but I didn't want to spend every dollar just to make other people think we were doing well. That difference slowly became the biggest problem in our marriage. The first time Claire openly embarrassed me about the house was at a dinner with her friends. Someone asked where we lived. Claire gave the neighborhood name. Then she laughed. "It's temporary." I looked at her. She continued, "We're saving for the real house." One of her friends asked, "What's wrong with your current place?" Claire looked at me. "Nothing. It's just not where I see myself long term." I didn't say anything. On the drive home, I finally asked, "Why do you talk about our house like it's something you're ashamed of?" She sighed. "Because you take everything personally." "I'm asking a question." "You're too comfortable." That sentence stayed with me. Too comfortable. I had worked 60-hour weeks sometimes to make sure our bills were paid. I had repaired our leaking water heater myself. I had skipped vacations because I wanted to finish paying off my student loans. And somehow, being responsible meant I wasn't ambitious enough. Still, I tried. I took a management position at work. I started taking on larger consulting projects. Within 2 years, my income increased significantly. But it wasn't enough for Claire. Then Jason bought a new house. Claire came home from the housewarming party glowing. "It's beautiful," she said. "I'm sure. His mortgage is huge, though." I smiled. "Then I'm glad we don't have one like that." She looked at me. "You really don't get it." "Get what?" "People notice things." That was the night I realized we weren't arguing about money. We were arguing about what kind of person I was. And Claire had already decided I wasn't enough. About 6 months later, she started talking about a man she worked with named Ryan. At first, I wasn't worried. She mentioned him occasionally. Then she started comparing me to him. "Ryan just bought a condo downtown." "Good for him. He's younger than you." I looked up from my laptop. "What's your point?" "Nothing." But there was always a point. One evening, she came home and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I think we need some space." I stared at her. "Are you asking for a separation?" She nodded. "I've been thinking about this for months." "Is there someone else?" She didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. "Ryan." She looked down. "Yes." I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I simply asked, "Do you love him?" She whispered, "I think I could." That hurt more than I expected. She packed 2 suitcases the next morning. Before leaving, she stood in the doorway and looked around the living room. "You're going to be fine here," she said. I nodded. She smiled sadly. "Maybe this is exactly the life you wanted." Then she left. For the first few weeks, I barely slept. But I didn't chase her. I didn't call Ryan. I didn't contact her family. I went to work. I came home. I cooked. I started exercising again. And eventually, I started feeling like myself. The divorce was surprisingly straightforward. We had no children, and our finances were mostly separate. Claire wanted her share of the equity in the house. I agreed. After everything was settled, I refinanced the mortgage and bought out her portion. She moved into a downtown apartment with Ryan. A month later, I saw a photo online. Claire was standing beside him at a rooftop restaurant. She looked happy. I didn't feel angry. Mostly, I felt relieved. Then something unexpected happened. My consulting work took off. A company I had been doing small projects for offered me a long-term contract. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And because I wasn't supporting a lifestyle anymore, I saved almost everything. I paid down the mortgage. I finished the basement. I replaced the old kitchen cabinets. I didn't turn the house into some luxury mansion. I just made it comfortable. For the first time, I actually liked coming home. Then, almost a year after Claire left, I received an email from an attorney. It was about the house. At first, I thought there was a problem with the title. There wasn't. The issue was something I had completely forgotten about. When we bought the house, the previous owner was an elderly man named Harold. He had lived there for almost 40 years. During the closing process, he told me something unusual. He said, "If you ever decide to sell, I'd like the first opportunity to buy it back for my granddaughter." I had agreed. It wasn't legally binding, just a personal promise. After the divorce, I never thought about it again. The attorney's email explained that Harold's granddaughter, Emily, had recently learned about the property and wanted to discuss purchasing it. I called her. She explained that Harold had passed away and had left a letter asking her to find me if I ever considered selling. I told her I wasn't selling. She thanked me anyway. Then she said something that surprised me. "My grandfather always said you were the only buyer who actually listened to him." I smiled. He was a good man. He thought so too. We ended the call. I didn't know it then, but that conversation would matter later. A few months passed. Then Claire called. I almost didn't answer. "Hi," she said. "Hi." There was a long pause. "How are you?" "I'm okay." "Good." Another pause. Then she said, "Are you home?" "Yes." "Can I come by?" I should have asked why. Instead, I said, "Sure." She arrived 20 minutes later. That's when I saw the suitcase. She stood on the porch looking exhausted. "Claire." She wiped rain from her face. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked into the living room and looked around. Her eyes moved slowly across the new flooring, the furniture, the shelves, the framed photographs. "You changed it." "A little. It looks nice." "Thanks." She sat down. I stayed standing. "What happened?" She stared at the floor. "Ryan and I broke up." I nodded. "When?" 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry." She looked at me. "That's it. What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." She rubbed her hands together. "I'm staying with my sister right now. It's complicated." I didn't interrupt. Finally, she said, "I made a mistake." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not because I wanted her back, because a part of me had spent years hoping she would eventually say those words. But hearing them now didn't feel the way I imagined. "What kind of mistake?" "Leaving." I sat down across from her. "Claire, you didn't just leave." She nodded. "I know. You told me I wasn't ambitious enough." "I know. You told people our house was embarrassing." "I know. You chose another man." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know." I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Then she said, "I want to come home." I stared at her. "This isn't your home anymore." She looked genuinely shocked. "I'm your wife." "No." She blinked. "We're divorced." She looked away. "I know. I thought that would be the end of it." But then she said, "I thought you would want me back." I gave her an honest answer. "A year ago, maybe. And now? Now I don't." She cried quietly. I didn't comfort her the way I once would have. I gave her a glass of water. Then I asked if she had somewhere safe to stay. She said yes. Her sister had agreed to let her stay for a few weeks. I offered to help her move her remaining things from Ryan's apartment. That was all. Before she left, she stopped at the door. "Do you hate me?" "No." "Then why don't you want me?" I thought about that question for a long time. Because I finally stopped trying to convince someone to value me. She nodded slowly. Then she left. I thought that was the ending. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I received another letter from the attorney who represented Harold's estate. He wanted to meet. I almost ignored it. Instead, I went. He placed a folder on the desk. Inside was a letter from Harold. It wasn't a second will. It wasn't some secret fortune. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was simply a handwritten letter Harold had written shortly before his death. He had apparently asked his attorney to keep it in his estate file. The letter said that if I still owned the house, he wanted me to know why he had been so particular about finding someone who would take care of it. The house had belonged to his wife. They had raised their daughter there. After she died, he had kept it because he couldn't bear the thought of it being turned into a rental property and neglected. He had noticed how carefully I walked through the house during the inspection. He noticed that I asked questions about the roof instead of the kitchen. He noticed that I asked about the neighbors. And he noticed that I had promised to take care of the place. Then came the part that surprised me. Harold had left me a small investment account. Not enough to change my life, but enough to pay off the remaining mortgage. The attorney explained that Harold had watched the property records after selling the house and had seen that I was still living there. He had apparently decided I was the person he wanted to leave it to. I sat there staring at the document. I didn't feel rich. I felt seen. For years, I had been told that I wasn't impressive enough, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that my quiet life meant I had failed. And this old man, who barely knew me, had noticed the things my own wife never valued. Not my salary, not my car, not my clothes, my character. I paid off the mortgage the following week. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't post about it. I didn't celebrate publicly. I simply sat in the living room one evening, looking around the house she had once called embarrassing. And I realized something. The house had never been the problem. Neither had I. We had just wanted different things from life. Claire wanted a life that looked successful from the outside. I wanted one that felt stable and meaningful from the inside. A few months later, I ran into Claire at a grocery store. She looked healthier, calmer. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was good. She smiled. Still in the little house? I smiled back. Still here. She hesitated. Are you happy? I thought about it. Yes. She nodded. I think I understand now. I didn't ask what she meant. She didn't explain. We said goodbye. That was the last real conversation we ever had. I still live in that house. I still make coffee in the same kitchen. I still walk into the same living room every evening. The mortgage is gone now. But strangely, that's not what makes me happiest. It's the fact that I no longer look around and wonder whether someone else thinks my life is impressive enough. For years, I thought being underestimated was something I needed to correct. Now I realize sometimes being underestimated is simply freedom. People who don't recognize your value can't control how you see yourself forever. Eventually, you stop performing for them. You stop explaining. You stop chasing approval. And you start building a life that makes sense to you. Claire left because she thought there was a better life somewhere else. She eventually returned to the house she once mocked. But by then, I had learned something she couldn't take from me. Home was never the house. Home was the peace I built inside myself after I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me I was enough.